My whole life was changed by the opportunities that came to me through the success of Star Wars.
It really is a wonderful morality tale.
It's George's vision, and he truly is a visual man in a profound way.
There's so many accomplishments that George has done that really has changed the business as we know it.
I expected not to ever make a hit movie. That wasn't my agenda. I certainly didn't expect Star Wars to be this giant hit.
In our country, Watergate tore us apart. And then we had the Vietnam War on top of that, which was dividing the nation like nothing else had. It was a terrible decade of great storm and violence in our history.
In the late 60s, the Warners, the Xanax, all the people that started the studios in the first place were retiring, and they were selling the studios to corporations. They were beverage companies and all kinds of they were in other businesses. They didn't know at all how to run a movie studio. All they know is if the marketing department said people want to see this, then you make that. So they started marketing pictures and studying the demographics and all these kinds of things, and they realized that there was a market for films made by young people for young people because the young person was becoming a bigger part of their market. It was a state of confusion, and a lot of filmmakers got to make projects that they ordinarily wouldn't have gotten to make. And I got caught right in the middle of it.
George was the kind of maverick from Northern California, an independent filmmaker who was always extremely proud that he had very few attachments to Hollywood.
I was teaching at USC, and George was in one of the seminars. We talked about some of his early attempts at filmmaking. And I'll tell you, right from the beginning, George had a unique vision.
George was a guy that thought out of the box, as you can certainly see by his student film THX 1138. And he shot a film that was 20 minutes long. It was supposed to be 5 minutes, but he got a great deal of recognition and opened the eyes of the professors that kids could do something out of the box, beyond what the restrictions were.
George's style was fantastic. I don't care what he was doing, it just looked more personal than some of the other work.
I came up with no intention of actually becoming successful, but I did have a very strong feeling about being able to be in control of my work and not having people tamper with it. I had gone from being extremely experimental and hard-edged and then really taking up a challenge that Francis gave me. I bet you can't do just a silly comedy, kind of warm and fuzzy comedy. So, okay, I'll try that.
Toward the end of the post-production on American Graffiti, we organized a screening at the North Point Cinema in San Francisco, and we felt the reaction to the film was quite positive. But Ned Tannen from Universal was very upset. He said, you shouldn't be showing it to an audience at this stage, and we were totally flabbergasted.
My first film they didn't understand, and they meddled with it after it was all finished. Same thing with my second film. The corporate entity came in and jerry-rigged with it, cut 5 minutes out.
All during this time, he was talking about the fact that he would like to do a Flash Gordon kind of 1930s space opera, and he started working on that in earnest.
And people said, all things to pick. Why in the world would you do that? I said, well, it's fun to make films for young people. It's a chance to sort of make an impression on them.
When Lucas was writing the script of Star Wars, he was heavily interested in Joseph Campbell. What Joseph Campbell was interested in was to see the connections between myths, the myths of different cultures, to try to find out what were the threads that tied all these very disparate cultures together.
I did research to try to distill everything down into motifs that would be universal. I attribute most of the success to the psychological underpinnings, which have been around for thousands of years, and the people still react the same way to the stories as they always have.
George is nothing if not a good reporter. And when he sets out to do his work, he starts reporting from the best sources he can gather. He brought Campbell into the process of looking at his work on Star Wars and saying, is this right? Am I getting it down? Is this the right emphasis? Is this the right character? Joseph Campbell said to me, the best student he ever had was George Lucas.
You have the youth who's on the adventure that you can identify with. You have the swashbuckler, and you have the damsel. She may not sort of have the reactions that are conventional. However, she is in distress. And you have the wise old man who you go and you find him, and you have the funnier characters. I mean, it really adheres strictly to that form.
It's the traditional ritualistic coming of age story. And when I went into the mythological side of what I wanted to do, that's a key factor with heroes. The most successful science fiction film at that point was 2001. And successful then was that it made about $24 million or something like that. Most hit science fiction films would make about $16 million, which was the Planet of the Apes films and that sort of thing. But most science fiction films would make under $10 million. I mean, there's no reason to think that it would do any different. When I was pitching the film, all I had was like a 14-page story treatment. It was very vague. Said it's kind of a 1930s action-adventure Saturday afternoon serial based on the kind of Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers kind of comic book future. And that's about all they knew about it.
In the 70s, science fiction seemed to be all about apocalyptic societies and death and destruction. Not very inspiring. So we were fighting an uphill battle with the science fiction project.
He didn't care for the studio system. He used it because there was no other way of doing what he needed to do.
We had a meeting, and George said, well, I've been thinking about this thing called Star Wars, and told me about it. I said, that sounds terrific. I mean, the technology part of the whole thing was completely over my head, but I just believed in him and his genius. I sort of recognized off of American Graffiti that he really was a genius, so I just flew with it.
He understood what talent was. He respected talent, and he was able to say, I think this guy's talented. I think we're going to invest in him. So Alan Ladd Jr. invested in me. He did not invest in the movie, and it paid off.
American Graffiti showed a very human center and a huge heart that George has always had, by the way. And I think that surprised a lot of people.
The concept of the Force was an important one in the story, and the difficulty is trying to create a religious, spiritual concept that works in a very simple way without heavy exposition or without it seeming to pull down the story.
It got to be a very fat script, about 200 pages, and the story had gotten away from me. So the only way I could cope with it was to say, I'll take the first third, the first act, and I'll make that into a movie. But I'd written all this other stuff. I'd spent a year writing this story, and I said, well, I'm not going to just throw away 2/3 of my year and say, this is all I can afford at this point. This is the only amount of money I'm going to get is to do this one movie. So I put it on the shelf, and I said, by hook or by crook, I will finish this movie. I'd seen some of his paintings, and I thought he was really brilliant. I had said, look, I want you to do some paintings of these scenes that I've done so that the studio can get a picture of what it is I'm talking about. When I turned in the script, I had about 5 or 6 drawings that I turned in with it also to say, this is what it's going to look like.
He had a concept for a big, spectacular visual, and it didn't come across in the script. So I tried to give it scale, juxtaposing the tiny little figures with the great, spectacular backgrounds. George would say, don't worry about how we're going to do it. We just want to see an impression of what the scenes would look like on the screen.
When I made the deal for Star Wars, originally I made the deal before American Graffiti didn't even come out. Because Alan Ladd had seen the film American Graffiti. He said, I'll make a deal. But he made a very, you're going to make X number of dollars and this kind of thing. And it was a very, one-page memo. When it came up to doing the contract for the film, which is about a year later, I knew that what I really had to do was to protect the unwritten part, the other 2 parts of the script.
All of a sudden, Graffiti comes out, and it's a big, huge smash success. So his agent came back and said, well, hey, look, this guy's made this huge, successful movie now. Don't you think we should get more than $200,000 for writing, directing, and producing a movie? I said, yeah, I think you should get more.
I was very careful to say, I don't want more money, I don't want more points, I don't want anything financial, but I do want the right to make these sequels. I was working on the assumption, as every filmmaker works on, which is the film will be a disaster and that it won't be promoted and it'll just die a horrible death. And it'll be very hard to get these next 2 movies made.
George said, like a big slice of the merchandising. Up until that time, merchandising had been relatively unknown.
When I took over the licensing, I simply said, I'm going to be able to make T-shirts, I'm going to be able to make posters, and I'm going to be able to sell this movie, even though the studio won't. So I managed to get control of pretty much everything that was left over that the studio didn't really care about.
George was enormously farsighted, and the studio wasn't, because they didn't know that the world was changing. George did know the world was changing. I mean, he changed it.
There was no special effects companies in those days, and the studio's special effects department had been disbanded. Part of that was because of the expense, and part of it was that the American taste, the culture had gone toward very realistic-looking films.
We approached the visual effects as a grand experiment, saying, can we do this with a lot of people who work on architectural models and in commercials and have never made feature films before?
We were kind of like a weird kind of fraternity of robotic photography nuts or something like that. I mean, this was a big movie for Fox. We were doing commercials. We all dreamed about doing a feature, and this was like the dream come true. So Star Wars came along just the perfect time for us.
We moved into a big empty warehouse in Van Nuys, right near the Van Nuys airport, and basically started from scratch. I mean, it was empty. In the early days, you used to park your car inside. There was no cam equipment, no rooms to speak of.
I was essentially to be responsible for doing the visual effects for the film. We took the concept of motion control, which is essentially an old concept of being able to duplicate camera motion through more than one pass so that you can generate multiple elements of film, and we made it production savvy by tying it into a computer, which was at that point custom-built microprocessors. There were no PCs. You didn't go down buying a PC. We built them from scratch.
I was one of the early hires. They had a small art department, and there were some concept models made out of cardboard and model kit pieces. There were some storyboards and some concept illustrations that Joe Johnson had done. There were some paintings that Ralph McQuarrie had done.
Everything came either from my sketches or Ralph's paintings and drawings and any input that George might have, you know. There wasn't a lot of outside influences on Star Wars.
George wanted it to look like you could actually see the rivets, so you could see the logic of how it was made. I was originally hired to work on the Death Star, the 40 foot by, 40 by 80 feet or 40 by 60 feet or something like that. Nobody wanted to do the job because you had to spend a lot of time on your knees.
Everybody sort of could cross-train and work in different techniques. That was different than the Hollywood system that had very strict sort of union rules. But there was no way that this work could be done that way, or no way that the Hollywood unions could understand what we were doing.
It just happened that we were both making these movies and casting at the same time, so we decided to combine our efforts. I've made movies with very young people that have no track record, so I have to kind of go through and discover them, pick them, and then test them and go through them and have readings. And so it takes a long time. I spent probably 6 or 7 months casting Star Wars, and that's a long process to sit in a little room and interview people. And I interviewed thousands of people.
Well, it checks out again. There's no mistake. You can't find Organa Major? I found it. It's just not there.
Oh, I found it. It's just not there.
What's left of it is contaminated. That's it there. Look at those radiation readouts. It's impossible. I've never seen anything like it.
The Empire must have gotten here first.
The planet has been completely blown away.
She's part of the royal family. They won't get any information from her. She knows the art of mind control.
I can remember a line from the screen test, which I don't think ever will leave me. And Luke says, but we can't turn back. Fear is their greatest defense. I doubt if the actual security there is any greater than it was on Aquilai or Sullust, and what there is most likely directed towards a large-scale assault.
Fear is their greatest defense. I doubt if the actual security there is much greater than on Aquilai or Sullust, and what there is most likely directed towards a large-scale assault.
And I read that line, I thought, who talks like this? So I just did it sincerely.
Well, how many more systems have to get blown away before you have no place to hide and are forced to fight? Don't you realize what's going on?
Kid, you take the glory and the good intentions. I'll take the reward.
What's that little droid carrying that's so blasted important?
What's the little droid carrying that's so important?
I was given sides and asked if I would help read the other actors. It became my task to explain to the other actors who were coming along just what it was that these sides were meant to be about.
They're gonna follow us, they'll destroy your hidden bases, they'll destroy the whole system.
Right, I know they'll follow, and they'll bring the Death Star too.
All right,
Well, what was so clear was what the idea was of the character relationships. Mark was the callow youth, and I was the smartass, and we each had a clear section of turf to explore.
The planet's totally blown away. It would have taken 1,000 ships with more firepower than I've ever seen to do that. If the Empire had a new weapon that could do this, I'd know about it. I'd have heard something.
Well, you know about it now. The enemy's on the move. We haven't much time.
Well, I brought you here. Now what?
We've got to find the rebels. What we're carrying belongs to them.
Their bases are very well hidden, son. All the power of the Empire can't find them. Do you know where they are?
No, not anymore.
Well, I'm not going to take you on an impossible chase across the galaxy.
The plans and specifications to a battle station with enough firepower to destroy an entire system. Our only hope in destroying it is to find its weakness, which we will determine from the data I stored in R2.
Now, our only hope in destroying it is to find its weakness, which we'll do from the data I stored in R2. Okay, now we captured the plans in a raid on the Imperial shipyards, but we fell under attack before I could get the data to safety, so I hid it in R2 and sent them on.
When R2 has been safely delivered to my forces, you get your reward.
What?
You have my guarantee.
What's the little droid carrying that's so blasted important?
The plans and specifications to a battle station with enough firepower to destroy an entire system.
I met with Brian De Palma and George, and Brian did all the talking because George didn't talk then. There were incredible actresses that were my age that were being considered for this role, so I didn't think I would get it.
But our only hope is to destroy it before it destroys us. Look, hiding is useless now. With the Death Star, they'll continue to go on destroying systems until they found us. We have no alternative but to process the information and use it while there's still time.
I got it with the proviso that I went to a fat farm and that I lose 10 pounds. And that I think they were hoping it was going to come out 5 here and 5 here. And my character was someone who was feisty and all of that. But I felt myself to be a bit of that too. So it would have been unlikely that I would be cast as a shrinking Violet. He cast us to type in a way.
He came in and said, these are the 3 unknown people that I want to go with. And I figured we've gone down this far on the road. He knows what he's doing. I'd be lying if I said that, oh my God, Harrison's perfect and Carrie's perfect and Mark is fantastic. No, I was very nervous about the cast.
The Alec Guinness role required a certain stability and gravitas as a character, which meant we needed a very, very strong character actor to play that part.
I sat down on one of the sofas, waiting for George. The door opened, and George walked in with Gary behind him. So naturally, what did I do? I'm raised in England. As soon as someone comes in through the door, I stand up. George goes, and virtually turned to Gary and said, I think we found him.
They couldn't find anyone that would fit inside this robot to make it move. And they couldn't use kids because it was quite a heavy machine, you know, that was weighed about 80 pounds. Well, I've had a lot of experience of inside costumes and inside cats and dogs and goodness knows what else, you know. So when I got into the robot, you know, he said, look happy. So I'd go inside. No, nobody could see my expressions, obviously. But it just, you have to do something to get the feel of the thing.
He'd been seeing people every 5 minutes. I was there for a while and thinking, well, nearly time to go, I guess. And then, kind of over George's shoulder, I saw painting. And the most extraordinary thing happened. It just struck me because I kind of looked at this face. And the face looked back at me, and we had this extraordinary eye contact. You know, he's looking right out of the picture, and he seemed to be saying, come, be with me. And the vulnerability in his face made me want to help him. Isn't that weird? He just looks utterly vulnerable. That painting completely changed my attitude to the whole project. Years later, I was able to go to Ralph McQuarrie and say, you realize this is all your fault.
The overriding thing for me, really, at that stage was
the amount of work that we had to do, the amount of stuff there was to achieve, and we had grave doubts about getting it done in time.
We were going out there to shoot on the salt flat. I came out in the morning and the rain was going horizontally down the street this way. I thought, my God. I just called a rest day and the crew told them all to go back to bed because there was no way we were going to shoot on that.
It was the first 2 weeks of shooting. We'd run into a lot of weather problems. The sets had blown down. I didn't get everything shot. It was a disaster. At that point, I was pretty depressed, saying, boy, I've got myself in way over my head. I don't know what I'm going to do.
I was the only stunt person on the picture in Tunisia. I became a Tuscan Raider or a sand person. I'm not a sun merchant. I don't like the sun. I just burn. So I just died with the heat of it. I couldn't stand it anymore. It was so hot. But there were so many problems. It just was not a good location.
C-3PO was finally put together for the very first time the day before we started shooting. R2-D2 didn't really function that well. He could run along in the three-legged position, but he couldn't turn his head at the same time.
Yeah, there were wires everywhere. And the head was on a track of ball bearings. I used to grab whatever I could grab hold of and turn it physically that way and that way, not very far. Because I went too far, the wires would go around my neck. And then they'd say, cut, right, break for lunch. And everybody just walk away and leave me. And then they'd remember me, eventually. But that'll happen many times.
Was bad enough as putting on the costume for the first time. And within 2 paces, the left leg had shattered down onto the plastic of the left foot and was gently but forcibly and persistently knifing it into the soft part of my foot. So we took it off and I limped to the set with 1 foot. And it was then I began to panic about the days to come.
It was, for me, fascinating to watch Alec Guinness. He was always prepared, always professional, always very kind to the other actors. He had a very clear head about how to serve the story.
He was the person who sort of brought it some legitimacy. And I asked him why he wanted to do it. And he loved the idea of playing a mentor or wizard in a morality play where good and evil so clearly defined.
Let me see your identification.
You don't need to see his identification.
I don't need to see your identification.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
He can go about his business.
You can go about your business.
Overlock.
That was almost like a whole separate movie. It was like getting a whole fresh start, and it was all new, really.
We were all very different ages. I was 19, Harrison was 33, and he was sort of the big man on campus. And meeting him, you sort of felt, well, he'll be a movie star.
I put that mask on, and Chewie transformed me. I transformed. The attitude was different. The walk was different. Chewie turned on. Do the scenes, come back, take the mask off. Peter was back.
At 5:30, we had to stop unless we were in the middle of a shot. I could ask the crew for an extra 15 minutes, but they always voted me down.
I'm not putting down the British crew, but there was kind of attitude like, what is this?
Didn't think it was going to be any good. At least I didn't. I thought, this is a bit strange. And I can remember this lighting man. He said, what is all this about? He said, I can't, it's a load of rubbish, And we all thought it the same at the time. Thought, yeah, this is a bit strange.
It was a princess with hair and weird buns on the side and a giant in a monkey suit or something. I mean, it was weird. It was very, very weird.
It was tough dialogue to say. So I think I got, Governor Tarkin, I thought I recognized your foul stench, which, I don't know about you, but I'm always talking like that. We used to say you can type this stuff, but you can't say it.
George didn't really like being in London, I suppose, is the best way to say it. He doesn't like being away from home. He's not the most gregarious person in the world. He had some clashes with the cameraman. Gil Taylor was a very old-school cameraman. very crotchety. George had coming out of low-budget filmmaking, was used to doing a lot of things himself. So George would say things like, well, put a light here. And Gil took offense at that kind of thing. He says, that's not your job, son. You tell me what you want to see, and I'll do it the way I think is best to create what you want to see. It was a clash of style of working.
What was disappointing would be the cantina sequence. It was really imaginatively described. And then you go in there, and it looks like the Nutcracker Suite. You know, there's a frog guy and a mouse girl and a giant cricket at the bar. It was really disappointing. But, you know, George says, don't worry, we're going to fix all of this.
We didn't see anything of what was ended up on the screen. So, you know, when they blew my planet up, I was looking at a guy going like this against a board with a circle on it. I mean, it was funny. George never talked. It was sort of, we felt he wanted us to hit our marks and magically accommodate our dialogue. And he lost his voice at one point, and we didn't know that for days. And we wanted to get him a little board where it said, faster and more intense. That was his main direction. He just wanted us to speed through it.
George is notorious for saying, after a take, do it again, faster, more intensity. He certainly said to me, was, terrific, Tony, can you do it again faster? But that's it, I didn't get more intensity. I don't think 3PO with more intensity would be bearable, do you?
We all had to fill in a lot of the blanks. It was more a matter of if we did something he didn't like, he'd tell us, rather than telling us what to do.
I think George likes people. I think George is a warm-hearted person. But he's a little impatient with the process of acting, of finding something, and he thinks it's there. It's right there. I wrote it down, Just do that. Sometimes you can't just do that and make it work.
He's really focused on what he's trying to do and get everything right, and the smoke right, and the squibs go off right, and we're just taunting him mercilessly.
Carrie and Mark have a wicked sense of humour. Carrie was very young, and Mark was very young. So they were the junior division, and they were always larking about on set. So it kept us in stitches.
I got one outfit for the first movie, and as George taught me, there is no underwear in space. Instead of that, there is gaffer tape. So I was taped down. And I used to say we should just make up a contest on the call sheet as who's going to rip it off. But we didn't do that.
And we were all goofing around and trying to make George crack, because he really looked like he was ready to burst into tears, and you try and cheer him up.
Okay, cut. Got it. And.
The mic was in frame.
The mic was in picture.
Oh.
The mic was in picture. The mic was in picture.
Everyone back to first position.
The sound department has to pay up.
That to him was really inappropriate humor at the time, because I'm sure he's in the zone and he's seeing what he wants to do, and we're just like actors trying to stave off boredom because, we've been in the trash compactor all morning.
But it is amazing what you can do when you have a vision, when you have an ambition, and when you can bend other people's will to your desire. And the thing that kept it focused towards the ambitions was George's vision and his passion for the idea.
Mark Hamill wanted to do as much as he could himself. I had times when I had to keep him back because he was too enthusiastic, actually, and he could have got hurt. Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker had to swing over this void. We couldn't afford stunt doubles. So I said to George, well, I can teach them to do this and be quite safe. My buddy and I, we put the harnesses on, we put the wires on, everyone down below, because remember, we're about 20 meters up, looking down on them, right? And as we swung across, there was a terrible tear. And my buddy said to me, Peter, your harness is snapped. And Mark, he said, I'm not going in that, it's too dangerous. And this is where I discovered you had to be a good liar. I said, no, there's nothing wrong with the harness. I split my trousers as I landed. He said, oh, I thought it was the harness. I said, Mark, I wouldn't let you go on this if it was dangerous. They did it, as you know, in one take, and that's how we got it.
That was really early on in the shoot, when I was still worried about my weight. And I thought that we're going to miss, and I'd hit the wall, and they will say, still too tubby. Let's bring in Jodie Foster.
George, he wanted a broadsword type of fight with a touch of Japanese behind it. But instead of becoming samurai moves with one hand, I kept it with two hands. So all the moves were two hands, completely like that. The first swords were bits of wood with from projection material wrapped around them. Now, the hardest thing for me on the first fights, Darth Vader was a very heavy man. Obi-Wan Kenobi was a gentleman, right, who had done some fencing in the theatre. I had to teach them, if that was the sword, to stop before they touched, because the blades were breaking. We broke so many blades, they just kept snapping.
Well, there was a lot of problems, yes. I mean, every board meeting I attended, I mean, the subject was always about Star Wars. Well, the costs are rising, it's this, it's that. Look, we've read drafts of scripts that make no sense to us in any way, shape, or form, and it was rather unpleasant.
The things that stick in my mind that made me laugh were like memos worried about whether or not the Wookiee should have pants. They're looking at this thing and saying, couldn't he have some lederhosen? And I thought, isn't this great, you know? Of all the things to worry about, the Wookiee has no pants.
I think we were like 2 weeks over schedule. At that point, the board of directors at Fox started to panic and tell Alan Ladd Jr. that he had to shut that film down regardless. And so he came to me and said, look, you've got to finish in the next week because I got another board meeting and I can't go in there and say we're still shooting.
I kept going on the phone to their production department saying, this is insane. If we put on a second crew to do this, it costs us more than going an extra week. And they said, it doesn't matter. The studio's opinion is that the day deadline is more important than the money you spent.
Well, I think George suffered a lot more than I was aware of at the time. But I was very focused on what I was doing because this was a very busy movie. It was just non-stop, dawn to dusk. We did go over at the end, and we split into 3 units right at the end, and Gary directed the 2nd unit, and I had the distinction of directing the 3rd unit of Star Wars. My shots were things like close-up of R2-D2's 3rd foot going down. Nothing too dramatic, but that's how we finished it.
I just finished shooting the movie and I was exhausted, basically, but I had to go right from the shooting into the finishing without a break. I started to see things cut together. I wasn't happy with it. I come in on weekends and I recut the film on my own, and I tried to get the editor to cut it my way, and he didn't really want to, and so I had to let the editor go. So I had no editor. I was behind schedule. I had to race to finish the movie.
It was cut in a very traditional manner of just playing things out in masters and then going into the coverage, and let the actors' rhythms dictate the cuts rather than having the cuts kind of drive rhythm of the scenes. So consequently, there wasn't any excitement in the footage the way that it had been put together.
Richard and I would sort of leapfrog. If he was on reel one, I would grab reel 2. And then when whoever finished that would grab reel 3 and then so forth. We used shots up until the very last frame. Very often, the very next frame would be the flash of the camera stop. For instance, there's a shot of one of the sand people. He knocks Luke down, and then he holds his weapon up over his head, and he just did it once, and we rocked it back and forth, so he did it a number of times. The only things that are there is what's presentable, and everything behind the scenes is a mess.
They had spent half their budget, and ultimately I had about 4 shots, none of which I would accept. They were just not good. That was pretty much of a low point. I had no special effects, and I didn't even know whether we were going to get the ships to work. So it was a pretty desperate time, and we'd spent half the budget, building the motion control cameras and setting the shop up, and it was a disaster, to say the least.
The factory has to be built before the first can of peas can be sent to the supermarket. And I think it was a year or more without any film coming out, without one shot being finished, because they were building optical printers, they were building cameras, we were building models.
I know that George was disappointed in the work, and I'm disappointed that he was disappointed. But there's a certain subjectivity to some of that stuff. I wish he'd been happier, but I also think that ultimately the work did the job.
I just sat in the one executive committee meeting where calling me over the coals. They just said it's the greatest picture ever made. That ended the conversation. They were afraid to say, well, you're stupid and you're wrong, and we want you out of this building by 5 o'clock this afternoon. So there were some tense moments there.
We put a production department in the special effects company. I went down there twice a week.
There was a certain amount of resentment at first because they felt that they were being challenged a bit on how they had set it up. We felt that there was a certain quasi-hippie mentality that some of them had about the schedule.
Ultimately, I guess we were known as a country club.
I think it looked to those guys that there needed to be a really strong production force in there that was going to meet some sort of quota.
Gary was a gearhead, so he could understand our problems. And George is a storyteller, you know, and so we have to serve his needs because he's the one that's telling the story. But we had to build these incredible contraptions in order to do it.
George was our general. We're his soldiers, and we're all fighting this single battle to get this film out. We're going on the front lines here. And that gave us also kind of a feeling of being special and fighting this great battle to, you know, get this thing done, whatever it is. That would be like the first animatic, which you do all in the computer now, of course. And we matched frame to frame and the action on that as close as we could. To describe that abstract world of a battle is impossible. Storyboards don't do it as far as the pacing, the rhythms that he needed.
George introduced the idea of what he called an organic soundtrack. George thought that Chewbacca might be made up from recordings of dogs or maybe even bears. In addition, I recorded some lions and tigers and even some walruses. I would begin editing them together and making little phrases out of the noises. I would take the recordings and edit the best pieces. The voice of R2 turned out to be the most difficult problem to solve in the sound design of the first movie, because R2 had to act alongside of the other actors. And the script only said that R2 made a sound or maybe R2 beeped. I had a small electronic synthesizer and I did some patches with it and made up some electronic sounds. But that didn't sound alive. At one point, we talked about R2's personality and we felt he was developing kind of as a toddler. So I did a lot of baby recordings. And eventually, we found that in the discussion of R2's voice, we were making the sounds ourselves. A few experiments led to the combination of using my voice doing baby talk, beeps and boops, with the electronic synthesizer. So R2 is sort of 50% machine and 50% organic, coming out of, you know, the performance of a person. The breathing for Vader was recorded by putting a little tiny microphone down inside a regulator on a scuba tank. And I breathed through the mask itself, and it breathed in and out of that came the various, you know, paces of Vader breathing. And that sound worked out pretty successfully.
I can still hear David Prowse's accent in the Darth Vader mask muffled because he would do the real dialogue, trying to curse Carrie Fisher or something. It was hilarious and terrifying at the same time because we didn't know what Darth sounded like. That was the first time we heard him. We're like, is that it? Is it going to be some Scottish guy or what is this?
George had hired David Prowse, but he said he wanted a so-called darker voice, and not in terms of ethnic, but in terms of timbre. And the rumor is that he thought of Orson Welles, and then probably thought that Orson might be too recognizable. So what he ends up is picking a voice that was born in Mississippi, raised in Michigan, and was a stutterer. And that happened to be my voice.
C-3PO's voice struck us all as, you know, well, we got to do something about that.
It was mentioned a number of times that C-3PO might sound like a used car salesman, not the English butler type.
I just came up with this voice of an over-the-top British butler. British because that would be my natural mode of thinking. A butler because that was his role in life. Nervous because that was his feeling in life. And it came as C-3PO human-cyborg relations.
A few people were brought in to record, and an attempt was made to see how 3PO would be with different kinds of voices.
I believe 30 actors coming in, some really quite impressive names.
Stan Freberg and a few others were auditioned.
Apparently one of them was a major cartoon actor, a man of literally 1,000 voices, who eventually said, you know, something, George, Tono's voice is pretty good for the character. Why didn't you just use his voice?
And eventually the discussion just quieted down, and it was an excellent performance. It synchronized with his body motions. It was a total character which he created. His track was left in the movie.
It was an early stage, you know, sort of a second or third cut. I had a couple of my friends come up to see it. Brian De Palma was in town, Stephen came, some other friends came to see it.
The human characters were there and the sets were there, but of course all the spectacular, the Death Star fight and the battle inside the trench and all that was just not even there to be seen. So the reaction was not a good one. I loved the movie. I was probably one of the only people in the audience that liked the movie.
Some of my friends were very honest. You know, I don't get it. It's kind of, what are you doing here? So that was basically the tenor of the whole thing. And on the other hand, the studio, when Laddie and his little group saw the film, they loved it. It's the first time I've actually shown a film, and one of the executives even cried at the screening. It was like very emotional for him.
I sat with my family around the kitchen table in my house, and I said, the most extraordinary day of my life has just taken place, and I want you to remember this day, because this is what I never dreamed, or maybe I dreamed, but I never thought I would have a day's experience like the day I've had today in seeing this film.
You know, and I couldn't even believe it, because I'm used to studios. At that point, I was used to studio chiefs saying, you know, this is terrible. You shouldn't show this to an audience, embarrassing, all that kind of stuff. So for me, it was a very rewarding thing to show it to people, even though it was in bad shape.
I remember bugging George, like, when can we hear the score? When can we hear the score? When can we hear the score?
I do remember George talking about the fact that what we were going to see in the film represents worlds that we hadn't seen, but that the music should give us some kind of an emotional anchor. We heard a romantic melody for Princess Leia, we heard bellicose music for the battle scenes, and some very heavy declamatory thing for Darth Vader.
To hear Johnny play the music for the first time is a thrill beyond anything I can describe.
It was my first opportunity to work with the London Symphony Orchestra, which was a thrill to me.
He really understood the genre that I was talking about. It's a group of composers that weren't that well looked upon in the 70s. There was a different attitude toward the old-fashioned symphonic scores. And I had a lot of music in the movie.
Fox said they wanted a trailer out for the Christmas films before the summer release. We didn't have any visual effects shots ready then, so we said, well, that's going to be limiting in what the footage can be.
What was really cool about the trailer was we were still working on the movie. It was more about the spirit of it. It introduced a lot of different characters, the robots. One thing they did have was a couple of the very early lightsabers.
Charles Lippincott was brought in as a marketing director. He was a science fiction fan. He had contacts with the fan base. That was critical, we felt. The science fiction fans were going to be the big supporter of this film, regardless of its popularity with any other audience. So that was the key target audience to start with.
Nobody wanted to book it. That same summer in 1977, Fox released a film called The Other Side of Midnight, which was based on an enormously successful bestseller. It wasn't a very good film, but it was a very, very much expected book. And in order to exhibit The Other Side of Midnight, you had to exhibit Star Wars.
We sent out a beautiful book, and that didn't seem to make an impact on him at all. We had very few bookings. Also, it wasn't that there had been Time or Newsweek or any of that stuff preceding this hadn't been screened and hadn't gotten the reviews.
Opening shot was one of the most important shots in the movie for the visual effects, because if the audience bought that shot, you had them.
The combined chest of everybody just kind of went, air was sucked out of the place. And then when the white Star Destroyer came overhead, I teared up. It was so powerful. I had seen that scene, but without music, without context, it's not the same thing.
There was this sort of weird electric kind of reaction. One had never seen anything like it.
I had never experienced special effects that were so real. I was dazzled.
I thought that it was revolutionary. This is a work of genius.
We were in shock. I felt like we were blasted in the back of our seats. And I said, man, who worked on this?
The theater was jammed full of people right down to the front. And there was a lot of hollering and cheering going on.
I remember leaving the theater and having these kids ask us for our autograph. I said, no, you don't want our autograph. We're like model builders. No, we want you to sign this. So we were thinking, wow, this must mean something. People are asking for our autographs.
Everybody's standing up and applauding. Never seen this before in my life. I mean, and I'll never see it again. We released, I think, 37 theaters initially and broke 36 house records.
I was completely shocked.
You got an amazing response. I used to drive by and look at the lines and think, what? I mean, it was the first sort of blockbuster.
George Lucas' Star Wars lifted us out of our sort of depression of the 70s and into an awareness and a focus on space and its possible future. This movie stood by itself.
Timing is everything in art. You bring out Star Wars too early and it's Buck Rogers. You bring it out too late and it doesn't fit our imagination. You bring it out just as the war in Vietnam is ending, when America feels uncertain of itself, when the old stories have died. And you bring it out at that time and suddenly it's a new game. Also, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to watch Star Wars.
People started seeing the world in the terms that Star Wars had laid down. People would say, may the Force be with you. It was a kind of code almost. It proved that you were one of the people who had seen the film and you were connecting with other people who had seen the film. Star Wars became like a kind of handshake.
I felt like this. Great, terrific, now I can go to work. Now I have an opportunity to take advantage of the success of this film and go to work. And as much as life changed for us, it changed for George as well.
About a month after it was released, I said, okay, it's a hit. I can now go ahead. I can make my other movies. I'm going to do this.
The greatest profit that 20th Century Fox had ever made in a single year was $37 million. And in whatever that year, 77, 78, whatever that year was, they made a profit of $79 million. That was Star Wars.
It wasn't a story of cultures, it wasn't a story of nationalities, it wasn't a story of geography. It was a story of mankind escaping his environment to a life which everybody expects to happen, but George Lucas was able to illustrate for us. This was what made it a success worldwide.
We had the footprint ceremony in the Chinese theater.
R2-D2, hurry up. Everybody over, please.
Thousands of people showed up. So we were sure by then that there was much more to it than just the science fiction audience.
R2-D2 goes in. He made about a 7-inch impression. Very hard. And the crowd is chanting for Darth Vader. They got it.
There wasn't anything available when the film came out. There wasn't even anything available for the following Christmas of '77. That was the infamous empty box campaign, where the idea proposed by Kenner was that there'd be these wonderful boxes with all the Star Wars illustrations on them, and the kid would get this for Christmas and open it up and there'd be a little certificate in there saying, you can get this toy in March.
The Star Wars Early Bird Certificate Package, new from Kenner.
I lit up when I found out that they were going to make my face a mask on a box of cereal with little dots where to cut my eyes out. The idea of me being on bubblegum cards, I thought you had to have athletic ability to be a bubblegum card. So I enjoyed the merchandising aspect of it.
We signed away our likeness, so when I look in the mirror, I have to pay George a couple of bucks. You're not really famous until you're a Pez dispenser. But, you sort of realize I'm not really famous. Princess Leia is. And I look like her. And owe George a couple of bucks.
In the world of merchandising, oh goodness gracious, people came to us with ideas all the time, every day, day and night, from all over the world for Star Wars merchandise. We were the ones in those days to say, no, sorry, that doesn't fit into our plan.